Alright, today's demonstration has to do with Almond Biscotti, a classic recipe that's been around for literally hundreds and hundreds of years or centuries. And what makes it classic is the fact that the only binder that holds everything together is an egg. There is not any use of butter, oil, or other fats. Alright, the amount that you're to be using is half a cup before they've been chopped up. Alright, so we have the potential, as you would think, to chop these up with a knife, okay, and making them a nice coarse chop, okay, which I'm going to finish on time lapse so that we can go from there. Alright, we're back in real time. Now, that was done on time lapse, but that probably took nearly 3 minutes of chopping. The problem with chopping the almonds that way is that the time lapse may not show it, but as you cut on an almond, sometimes it might squirt out from you. It definitely would be extra tedious to sit and chop a almond single at a time. Okay, you're more likely going to cut your fingertips than anything, so that may not be such a great solution. But here is one time-saving trick if we get these out of the way. Our half cup of almonds can actually go into a Ziploc bag, and a meat tenderizer that we have will smash them. Now we got to make sure though that we use the flat side, not the side with teeth for really tenderizing meat. Now I prefer to chop up the almonds that way or smash them that way because it contains all the powder that might be generated. I feel like I'm getting a more uniform chop to it. It was done a lot quicker. Okay, we're moving on to the part of the recipe where we're actually going to make the biscotti biscuit, the cookie itself. The recipe calls for 1/3 a cup of white sugar and 1 egg. This is going to go into a KitchenAid mixer with the flat paddle attachment. We're going to mix this on high for up to 5 minutes until this becomes very, very thick, and the term we're looking for is that it falls off the beater in a ribbon. So we'll start that and then transition to time lapse. Okay, it may take up to 5 minutes. This is probably about 3.5. I think I'm getting better results with this new type of beater we have that scrapes the sides. You can tell that the egg has changed to a pale yellow color. I hope the video shows that. And when we're talking about this falling off in ribbons, it's the fact that this has now been beaten to become so viscous, so thick, that the liquid falls off in one continuous string or ribbon. If this hadn't been beaten long enough and it wasn't as thick, it would fall off in drops. So this has now been properly beaten. We can move on to the next part of our recipe. And the next part of the recipe is to get our dry ingredients together, and they are to be sifted. So it says in a separate bowl we're going to sift the flour, baking powder, and salt. The salt is just 1/8 of a teaspoon, so fill a 1/4 teaspoon only halfway. The baking soda is 1/2 teaspoon. I'm sorry, baking powder. Baking powder, make sure you guys are using baking powder. Remember the side of this can also is for scraping that level. And then also our flour is a strange amount. It's going to be 1/2 cup plus another 6 tablespoons. Okay, because this is a recipe that was for larger log or cut in half. So recall that for our flour, we want to scoop that in loosely. Okay, level that off. So that is our 1/2 cup. And then for 6 tablespoons, we can measure out 6 tablespoons, and remember that a 1/4 cup is worth, say, 4 of the tablespoons. And then for the 5th and 6th, we can just go ahead and use a tablespoon. Now, we sift these ingredients together so they get light and fluffy, but we also better have a chance that our baking powder, a very small amount, is going to be evenly distributed throughout all of that. Any flour crumbs that were in the bottom can be pushed through. The sifter does not get washed. Okay, it gets wet and someone else can't use it for a while. It just gets off to the side and it's dry. If there's cocoa powder in there, we'd bang it out. We still have to add in our extract. Okay, we have a grand total of 1/2 teaspoon to work with. As I said before, I'm a fan of like a 50-50 mix. So I have a 1/2 teaspoon total, so I'm going to go 1/4 teaspoon, say, of vanilla and 1/4 teaspoon of almond. So I got all my wet together. Okay, that gets mixed in before we add in the dry. The dry doesn't all want to go in at once, or we're going to be having a big mess of it. But this does go together to form into a batter. Once it's in, I can go a little bit higher speed. You can see that the dough is starting to come together and hold. Okay, and then finally, after that's been done, we'll fold in the chopped almonds, which have already been measured out. They're in our bag. And the bag was folded over a little bit. That's our dough once we mix this together. Right now it is time to get our biscotti onto the pan ready to go in the oven to bake. This may be a dough that seems a little bit wet. If you follow the recipe the way you should have, then I want you to trust in it. That's all going to come together. Ahead of time, we will potentially have a little bit of flour on the side that we can use to help coat our fingers for digging out the dough. Because there's raw egg in there, we don't want to make a habit of going back into the flour container. And so, if necessary, if I have to use this flour, whatever I didn't use, I'm going to throw it at the end. Alright, so we can use a wooden spoon to help along, but at some point, our fingers may have to take over to get everything up off the bowl and form together into a log. Okay, and then there is a shape that we're looking for that will help us to make sure these bake evenly. So if I need to for a second, on top of this silicone mat, which we may call a Silpat, that is actually a trademark name. These are generic replacements. They work just as well for about 1/3 the cost. We can bring this together as one continuous ball. All right, the size we're looking for, 3.5 inches by 6. And trying to be a rectangle, actually from here to here is just about 3.5, and from here to here is 6. So not counting the curve, that is actually this is the shape that we're looking for. So maybe with a little flour, try not to over flour so it doesn't stick to my hand. We're going to try to flatten this out to make it one uniform rectangle. Okay, and it's important that we do that as best we can so that it bakes evenly. If it gets a little flatter, I can always come in from the sides. We got a little bit longer than 6, not by much, but that's about what we want that to be. Alright, so that we don't have to deal with the burn smell later on. Perhaps these little bit of crumbs on the side can get scraped off. And one little final flattening. Try to get this as uniform as we can in height. This is ready to go in the oven. Temperature is 350. Full-size log going to be, say, 25 minutes, but we don't cut that in half because it's half the size. I think I'd probably start checking about 18 minutes. So I'm going to put this in and get ready to start the timer. And we're back in real time. The final bake amount was about 18 minutes, and it got to this color that I'm pretty happy with. There's not really a need for a toothpick to go in to come out clean. You can kind of just tell by the color. It is a little soft on top, so you do have to be careful about trying to poke and see if it's done. The next steps in this would include dropping the temperature of the oven down to 325 because when we let these things bake for a second time, we do it at a little bit lower temperature. And we also want to get this loaf off of the Silpat and ready to cool down. And you want to be careful as you're scraping this up with the spatula. You will definitely probably see that you'll have some stuff stuck to the Silpat, and that's fine. Okay, so when this log comes off, we would definitely want to put that onto a cooling rack to let it cool down. And we'll come back and cut these. All right, we're back in real time now. We had the biscotti put onto a cooling rack for just about 5 minutes or so, just to cool it down enough that it's cool enough to handle. We don't want it to crumble and fall apart while we're cutting it, so this helps it kind of firm up. The importance of the cooling rack is air can circulate underneath so that it can cool from all directions. All right, the recipe talks about these being cut into strips, perhaps in a diagonal. We're going to go ahead and cut one nice straight edge here. This can go into our pile of other crumbs. This is some of the leftover stuff that was scraped off the sill pat, so I can go ahead and reuse it. And the width of this actually ends up being the width of our knife. So if we just rotate the knife in such a way, lining that up on its edge, then we can cut these coming across. They're cutting fairly easily because they are pretty soft. And in truth, you know, this biscuit, this cookie, could be eaten right now. Now, this here at the end is kind of a toss-up as far as whether that should be a mistake. I think it's usable enough, so we're going to go ahead. So, as I was saying, you could eat these directly as is, but we're going to go ahead and go for that second baking. That's going to require the oven to be at 325. We're going to put them on the sheet pan for 10 minutes. On one side, and then after 10 minutes turn them on the other side so they get nice and kind of crispy and dried out. This will be the equivalent of how much biscotti that you will get for your group of 2 to 3 people. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so 2 to 3 biscotti per person. And then you could actually decide when you do this in class that once I freshly bake this, I might take 1 or 2 and taste it as it is, fresh, and then bake off the others. That's going to be your call. They're pretty rich, so I think that you might find yourself wanting to eat 1 or so in class, and then potentially having 1 or 2 to take home to eat later. Alright, so as we said, these are going to be on their edge as so, about 10 minutes going into the oven, and after 10 minutes going to flip them, do them on the other side.